This video is sponsored by Manta Sleep. Do you have a problem sleeping at night? Up thinking about Star Wars what ifs? I do. You also have aspirations to possibly change your sleeping schedule and take naps during the day, because I also do. Well, Manta Sleep has the perfect sleep mask, equipped with a Velcro strap for ease of adjust if you have a fat head like me, as well as really cushioned eye pads so that there's not a lot of pressure on your face when you're trying to sleep. This is by far the most comfortable sleep mask I've ever tried. It is perfect because it actually, keeps the light out so you can stay asleep longer and happier. Along with the regular sleep mask, they have a Bluetooth version, which is incredible, has adjustable speakers so that you can listen to podcasts, Star Wars what ifs, and music while you go to sleep without having to ruin your headphones if you like to toss and turn. Manta Sleep is the perfect eye mask. It fits comfortably, it feels remarkable, and it's exactly what you need if you have a hard time sleeping or if you want to take naps during the day. So go down below and use my discount code
PentyPatrol
for 10% off on your Manta Sleep headwear, whether it's a mask, a white noise machine, whatever suits you best. Go down below and check them out. Special thanks to Manta Sleep for sponsoring today's video.
Hello. Our story begins inside of Padme's residence. She was the key to everything. The senator from Naboo, a position once held by the current chancellor, was holding together the very important legislative group known as the Delegation of 2000. She had the power to put a stop to Palpatine's executive growth. Following the siege of Coruscant, there was legislation forwarded by the Senate to allow Palpatine to take control over the Jedi Council, which is why he appointed Anakin to become his personal representative on the High Council. This was almost yesterday though. Since then, Anakin had joined the ranks of the Council, spoken to Obi-Wan about his secret mission, and returned to Padme's apartment to speak with her. The pressure of this predicament he was in led to a short argument between the two of them. As Senator Amidala saw, this was the best chance to end the war before Palpatine's executive control transformed him into an autocrat. The Republic couldn't sustain if he became that, and she knew it. Anakin didn't fully have a grasp on the political landscape, having been a part of the Outer Rim sieges for so long. At the current moment though, Anakin was speeding across the city to meet with the Chancellor at the Opera House, but his friend wasn't there yet. He was inside the apartment, lurking around corners, watching a married couple live a married life in secrecy. Anakin wouldn't get to the Opera House because of an accident on the freeway, one resulting in multiple casualties, and the Coruscant Guard would be overseeing traffic movement because of it. This would give Palpatine the additional 30 minutes or so to make his move. With so much chaos surrounding the end of the war, and Grievous's final battle coming soon, Sidious needed to protect himself. Most importantly, he needed assurance that Skywalker would fall to the dark side. What better tool than to kill the only person he saw as pure? Even better, the child inside would be left to die without her. Palpatine watched her, without Padme knowing, as she moved to a desk within the residence to sign off on some last-second bills to try and resume the diplomatic disputes over how to end the conflict. She finished and called C-3PO into the room to have him send the information to Bail Organa. The golden protocol droid waddled in with joy and got straight to work. As she walked out of the room, passed by Palpatine without even noticing. Just moments later, the Sith Lord would step into the hallway behind her, and with the ignition of his lightsaber, he told her that her time was over. She didn't scream, she didn't run. It was just a moment of realization that she knew she couldn't escape what she was. Padme didn't lower her head or cower, but when he took her life, it was done within an instant. His saber went through her heart and she dropped. Sidious walked out, under the cover of a shadow, and flicked an ignition switch, sending off a series of explosions behind him as he exited the establishment, and when he turned back, a blaze of fire erupted. Some of it even landed on his robes. He patted it out with his bare hand and smiled. 3PO could be heard in the other room, crying out for someone to help him. Sidious turned and vanished into the evening. He'd arrive at the Opera House on time, as scheduled. He wouldn't show up alone, he'd land with Mas Amedda and Sly Moore. They said hello to the press and answered questions, and he played the part of the elated Chancellor before going to his assigned seating. When he sat down at a seat, he waited patiently for Anakin to arrive, late, which he did. Skywalker felt terrible about being late, but Palpatine told his boy it was alright. He was happy he arrived here, safe and well. When Anakin's stress of showing up late dissipated, he He felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but he didn't understand why or where it came from. He continued to be with Palpatine as he told him the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Anakin even asked how he learned this tale, and Palpatine explained that he read a bunch of books and texts. It seemed as if the Jedi didn't care too much for destroying their ancient rival, if an old senator like himself could stumble upon it in a library on Naboo. This, of course, was the perfect diversion, because surely Palpatine wouldn't lie about this, and it did make sense that the Jedi wouldn't know about a text on Naboo. Anakin truthfully believed Palpatine was just being a foolish old man, not as an insult, but because how else would he know about the Sith? The framing of this tragedy was as if it had happened during the Old Republic, but no, that was the brilliance of Palpatine's planning. It sounded as if it was older than time, when in reality, Plagueis' tragedy was just as old as Skywalker was. These conversations continued as the Opera House ignited, with flurries of beautiful light. The Chancellor and his young friend stayed a little after the show and held more discussions, especially ones about how to find General Grievous. He then expressed hope that he'd be sent to Utapau. Anakin was the most talented candidate inside the council to handle this. He was very appreciative for the sentiment, but Palpatine insisted, having seen his ability to corner Grievous on the invisible hand. It was the perfect setup for ensuring that Anakin couldn't escape this praise that Palpatine gave him. Eventually, they split off, and Skywalker made his return to the senatorial residence. As he got closer, that dread he felt started to rise, until all of it became a reality. He was uneasy throughout the opera show, but he just thought that unease came from the topic of Sith tragedies. No, it was actually the Force telling him that something far worse had happened. Senator Amidala's residence was surrounded by char. There were detonation marks across the corridors of the rooms. The body had been removed, and Anakin landed, leaping out of the ship to find Masters Kenobi and Windu inside the scene of the wreckage. Obi-Wan braced Anakin as he demanded to know what had happened. Master Windu turned back and frowned. He was terribly upset that this happened. He knew that Anakin and Padme were good friends, but he had often considered Padme one of the finer people of the Senate. She wasn't just a politician to Windu, she was a humanitarian and also a good friend. Mace allowed Obi-Wan to break the news to Anakin. His voice was calming and soothing, but it slowly turned into an echo, as Skywalker, somewhere between lashing out and breaking apart, searched for anything to say. His mind started to swirl around him, and his head echoed with the words. The first 3 words, Padme is gone. He knew what it meant. He had heard it about several clones and Jedi throughout the war. Friends, allies, colleagues, brothers. He'd watched so many people die, and he thought that if anyone would be safe, it would be Padme, because she had escaped so much, aside from now, his visions. Anakin thought on Yoda's words about letting go, and he chose his path. Breaking apart wouldn't be satisfactory. Revenge needed to be fulfilled. He pushed past Obi-Wan and demanded to know who did this. Mace shook his head, informing Anakin that they had no information. The security cameras on the building were completely shut down because of a power outage within the building's security system. There were also no guards on duty for whatever reason. The Jedi didn't know it yet, but every single security officer that worked in the building had been murdered during the day. No one to call out, no one to call in. A team of 12 individuals murdered in their own homes across the city. On Coruscant, this wasn't the least likely thing to happen, because even though they worked in a high-rise, they couldn't afford the luxury of living in it. Plus, it was Coruscant, there were plenty of criminals, but this was too much of a coincidence. These deaths had been discovered throughout the day, and would be throughout the night. Their place of employment, this building, didn't know, and without a security system, they couldn't flag any ships coming or going, and they certainly couldn't find anyone moving throughout the residence itself. Anakin walked towards the ash and charred walls. He rubbed his metallic glove across it. He and Padme didn't end with an argument necessarily, but it felt like they did because he lashed out at her for asking him to talk to Palpatine about ending the war. A fury like he had never experienced before started to rise within him. Obi-Wan and Mace looked to each other, trying to figure out how they should consider approaching this. It was a very difficult and touchy subject for Anakin, and they honestly just decided that they needed to let him have this moment. They couldn't stop him from feeling like he had failed. Windu cleared some of the investigators because there was very little they could gain by simply looking at the explosion marks. They knew what type of bomb it was, a nanobot explosion. Due to the damage, they didn't know that Senator Amidala had been killed by a lightsaber. It looked like debris did it. they weren't able to save the twins, which wouldn't be revealed until the following morning in the press release, and they also didn't know C-3PO was still inside the apartment because he'd been buried. Anakin searched through the debris and found a chain, one that had been worn around her neck. The Japor snippet was burned up, half of it covered in darkness, with the other half of its ivory color still remaining intact, with the wipe of ash off of its surface. After finding the damaged snippet, he'd find 3PO, who was buried under a pillar. The protocol droid Anakin built when he was 9 was inoperable, completely offline. His golden plating had been burned, and half of his torso was crushed by the explosion. He wasn't online when Anakin found him, and it would take several months of work to get him into operating condition again. Because 3PO was all he could find, Anakin held the droid's head and cradled it against his chest until Obi-Wan told him it was time to go. Of course, Anakin didn't want to leave, but it wouldn't do him or anyone else any good by just waiting around inside this wreck for something to change. Kenobi and Anakin stood by each other's side in the LA-18 as it flew back to the Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan would try and entice Anakin into a sparring session to get his mind off of it, but Anakin refused. The broken shell of 3PO would be wheeled into his room and he'd start working on the protocol droid, until he'd fall asleep at the workbench late into the evening. His dreams were not filled with nightmares, just a black abyss. The morning would be even less rewarding than the night before. Obi-Wan would be the first to Anakin's room, and his former apprentice looked lifeless. The report about Senator Amidala having twins would be one of the first things Anakin heard. It wasn't something Kenobi knew until it was played over the news in a communication room. Skywalker couldn't even cry. He couldn't really feel anything, he just felt lifeless, as if an entire part of him had just been removed from existence. He numbly listened, and Obi-Wan, with the full understanding of the truth he had come to inside of his head, felt his own heart break. He knew to an extent what was happening between Anakin and Padme. Obi-Wan just decided to let it be. Now with the truth about Padme's pregnancy exposed, he couldn't help but feel even worse. They deserved to have a happy life together, though there was no time to be remorseful. Anakin had information and the council was gathering. Skywalker was unable to speak above a mumble. The council was relatively wary of this. Not that they feared him, but they were unsure of what Anakin's next move was being. He was erratic by nature. They were overly cautious with him as a result, because each of them, present and afar, could sense his distress. They knew of the friendship, Yoda knew of the visions, and they all had seen the news. The council would be cooperating in the investigation, but first, Master Windu would be delegated to going to Utapau. He'd volunteer himself for the mission. Mace knew that separating Obi-Wan from Anakin in this dire time would be inappropriate. Each of the Jedi had experienced loss to a degree. They knew how to handle it. Because no one knew about the visions, Obi-Wan would have been sent to Utapau, but with Padme's death out in the open, Mace had no intention of giving up the investigation into Palpatine. The council was able-bodied in his opinion without him, so he'd be going to fight General Grievous. After the Utapau campaign was confirmed for the 187th and General Windu, the council session did not conclude. They would be switching focus on the situation regarding Senator Amidala. Mace didn't want to use this as a moment to make Anakin feel worse about the situation, but more of an effort to show Anakin that they were collectively in his corner. Perhaps it was the council's way of making amends for the mission they assigned him to, but overall, this topic of discussion would be in the support of Anakin, Padme, and the senators whose lives were potentially in danger. Whatever force killed her needed to be found and dealt with appropriately. Windu didn't want the Jedi to become hate-filled or revenge-filled. He needed them to act in accordance with local authorities so that they could find out more about this assassination. It was told here that Master Terra Sanube was involved with the Coruscant Investigative Services and would be reporting all of his personal findings to the council itself. Anakin didn't speak much during this session, but he was grateful that Obi-Wan wasn't leaving the capital to fight Grievous alone. He believed Windu was more capable of defeating Grievous anyways. The council then adjourned and went their own separate ways. Anakin considered giving his appreciation, but he was the first to leave the council chambers, with Obi-Wan following him. They tried to be understanding, because at this point it wasn't a totally great look for the Jedi to be asking Anakin to spy on the Chancellor and then having Padme get bombed later that same day. It wasn't their fault or their intention, but it didn't reflect positively on the council itself. Anakin didn't even think about the mission. it became such an unimportant thought to him that it completely faded from his mind. Skywalker would vanish into his room to start working on 3PO. He felt as if his emotions had all been muted, because something wasn't right within him. His emotions were all out of whack, and he had maintained a perfectly acceptable demeanor for the council session, which they appreciated, but inside of his room, that slowly shifted. The previous night was him trying to rationalize the reality of the situation. Now that he had learned of the twins, and what could have been, he sat somberly by 3PO's side, and picked apart pieces of circuitry. As he welded pieces open and stashed them aside, his mind vibrantly replayed through the evening. With every welding flash came an experience having passed. And even though there was an underlying somberness in all of this, he started to feel his rage again. It built up, and every spark of the flame lit his heart on fire. He would kill that assassin. No matter who they were, he would murder them and make them suffer for eternity until he felt their pain was justified. The harder these thoughts pushed him, the harder his metallic hand gripped the device he was using until it bursted apart in his hand. He shoved it into the table and watched the flame put itself out, before he turned to his communicator buzzing to life. He thought it was a Jedi, but it was a Chancellor. For a second, his fury subsided and he picked it up, listening to the message that requested him to come to the executive offices. Anakin put the device down and nodded to himself before leaving. When he entered Palpatine's office, after not speaking to a single soul inside the temple, he sat down at the main desk and waited. The Chancellor was in his private office, vetoing the bill created by Amidala the previous night. All of her hard work, her legacy inside the Senate, forgotten within moments because of a veto. Anakin didn't know that, and he wouldn't need to. Palpatine firstly apologized to Anakin for the loss of his dear friend. He knew how close they were. He then commented on it loosely, admitting that he wished it were he, or one of the bankers. Senator Amidala was always such a joy to have around the Senate. Anakin was quite saddened, but the rage he felt alone was overwhelmed by the agony of Palpatine's kind-hearted words about a person he had advised for more than half of his political career. Anakin just told Palpatine in the same murmur he had all morning that he just wanted to find the culprit. The Chancellor understood, which is why he was going to provide Anakin with some very important details he had just learned from the investigation. Despite the Jedi involvement, part of it felt like a cover-up to Palpatine. Anakin asked what he meant, and the Chancellor elaborated. Surely with Master Kenobi going to Utapau, they were trying to separate Anakin from his support system as they made their own move against the Senate. As he mentioned the night before, all who gain power are afraid to lose it, even the Jedi. Anakin wasn't following, but Palpatine explained that the damage done to Amidala was with a lightsaber. The explosion was a cover-up. The investigators were staying quiet about this information because they didn't want the Jedi to find out that they knew. But if it was another one of the Order, similar to that bombing by that one girl, oh, who was it? Barriss Offee, several months before, then potentially this was another case of a Jedi operative. He told Anakin that they both knew how much the Jedi needed a break. They couldn't afford to be hit with another political scandal. If one of them was behind this, then maybe the Jedi weren't who the Republic thought they were. Anakin became openly frustrated at what he didn't really know. First of all, Kenobi wasn't leaving for Utapau, so it was a weird assumption. Windu was. It was also preposterous to assume a Jedi would do all of that against a senator who frequently backed them. Furthermore, if the Jedi had done it, then they had lied to him. Anakin wasn't sure what he was more upset about, the fact that Palpatine could be lying, or that he could be right. Those were both realities he didn't want to imagine. However, Palpatine had a lead, explaining that one of the security officers inside the building, murdered, had a camera inside of their home, probably for home invasions in the lower levels. According to the lead, Republic investigator, there had been a Jedi-looking figure present at the site of the murder. It's possible that the Jedi were fighting back. Anakin rejected this, and Palpatine gave Skywalker a motive, just to sway his heart to see the potential reality. The Council knew that the Republic would never believe that the Jedi would attack such a firm supporter of themselves, which is why they would do it. Killing Amidala would clear their name, and earn her movement more support inside the Senate. She would be treated as a martyr, and the Jedi who had obviously assigned Anakin to spy on the Chancellor could use this martyrdom legislation to seize control over the Republic themselves. It was far-fetched, but without knowing Palpatine vetoed Padme's legislation the moment he walked into the room, how else could he know? Palpatine told his boy to go quickly. The Jedi might even know about this very conversation. He just reminded Skywalker to think for himself. It was always one of his greatest qualities. Anakin got up, and just as he exited, Bail Organa stormed into the room, demanding answers for why Palpatine would target Senator Amidala's work. If Anakin hadn't left the room, he would have heard incriminating evidence to reject all claims made against the Jedi. Palpatine portrayed himself as an advocate for Amidala's work, and he was the reason it was killed. Bail Organa was furious because he recognized what this meant. The legislation would die and never reach the Rotunda floor. Palpatine just destroyed Padme's bill to save the Republic from executive powers. Despite seeing Bail, Anakin never thought to listen in. He heard Organa raise his voice, but the doors closed before he could actually hear what he was saying, and Anakin couldn't do anything about that. He could theoretically return, but he didn't believe it to concern him. It was likely something about a bill he never heard of, so close he was to unraveling this plot so early. Anakin would begin to visit various locations around the city. The 12 murders were horrible, and it left different communities worried for other strikes. It was clear, through the evidence presented, that someone capable of wielding a lightsaber had done this. Palpatine did not lie to Anakin. Then again, from his perspective, he never did. Skywalker reflected on the statement about gaining power, and how the Jedi may have been caught flat-footed by accident. Even at that though, with all the potential evidence stacking against the Jedi, Anakin couldn't really understand the motive. Sure, the Jedi Order could be afraid to lose its power, and they could be especially worried about how a certain bill could affect them, but trying to turn Padme into a martyr didn't sound like the Order. He could rationalize the Council had done some unbelievably hypocritical actions throughout the war. They lied, they faked deaths, they learned about Tyrannus being Dooku and didn't tell anyone, and they also did some other things he probably didn't know about. But outright murdering a senator, bombing a residence, and murdering 12 other innocent people wasn't like them in the slightest. The most brutal Jedi during the war never saw the council chambers, and the counselors were complacent, but not murderous. He still proceeded, searching for an answer. With all the evidence mounting against a Jedi assassin, there was something that threw Anakin off. Something Palpatine said about the council dispatching Obi-Wan to Utapau. It just didn't sit right with him. It was potentially a bad assumption, but in all fairness, Palpatine had every reason to assume they'd send Kenobi. And because Anakin didn't correct him, Palpatine planned on using this quote-unquote information against Skywalker. The relationship between Anakin and Windu had always been one of tolerance. Sidious wanted to exploit that and use it against them. The true murderer would be revealed by Palpatine to be Master Windu. But slowly, Anakin had to get there, because he would, at one of the other murder locations, see the recording of a Jedi-robed individual walking into a home and force-choking the individual. A lightsaber mark would be left behind, but the color of the saber and the robe were hidden by the hologram. Anakin, even though the culprit being a Jedi was forced on him, started to consider some other theories. Something wasn't adding up. Replaying through that night, he would have sensed Windu. That was someone he knew personally and worked closely with several times. Anakin didn't know about Force abilities to conceal one's essence. Mace wouldn't do something like that anyways. Well, as Skywalker was deciphering his own thoughts on the Jedi culprit, who might not be a Jedi, Master Windu arrived on Utapau. This was the first engagement between the two warriors since a Force crush during the siege of Coruscant. Windu didn't go in quietly. He went in guns blazing. Grievous didn't have time to dispatch the Separatist Council, and then he was threatened by Master Windu. Like he would have with Kenobi, he told Mace that he had been trained in their Jedi arts by Count Dooku, and Mace told Grievous he had no time for that, before crushing the droid general's chest and killing him instantly. Mace didn't really care for fighting Grievous, it wasn't worth his time. Maybe not ethical, but who cares, someone should have done it. He wasn't protected enough by his armor or the Force, plus the siege needed to be won. Mace would oversee the capture of the Separatist Council as Grievous's body got trampled over by walkers and tanks. Inside the capital, as night started to approach, Anakin stopped searching for answers. He'd spoken with Palpatine in the morning, visited the temple once, and spent most of the day with Terra Nube. Without Master Windu, the remaining counselors were weighing their options. Anakin returned to the residence to sit in the rubble. He felt pain across his body, and he lowered himself into the debris. He didn't choose to, but he envisioned Padme in her final moments, her beauty still present, her unrelenting desire to make the galaxy a better place. It was still with her, even in the end. Anakin's hands traced the floor as if he could feel footsteps. Drawn by the agony that filled his body, he slowly started to seize moments in time as if they were playing out before him in real time. He wasn't looking for answers anymore. This was him giving up and looking for peace. He almost killed someone earlier in the day. It was an accidental breaking of his will with rage. All of that came into place until no longer could he use that rage. It was why he came here. If his fury broke through his skin, he could hurt somebody, and he didn't want that yet. Not the wrong person, at least. But inside this apartment, Anakin felt grief. He didn't feel like there was anyone connected to him. No one but the past. His emotional state heightened his connection to the Force, and within Padme's final moments, he saw the true assassin. Blue and crimson robes, a blood-red lightsaber, a voice so familiar but distant, and then the silence. Padme's lifeless body fell, and he couldn't do anything to change that. He was sitting where she closed her eyes for the last time, and he barely knew that. But with his first ever use of psychometry, he kinda did. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't give him the answers. It just allowed him to say goodbye, in the only way that he could. When he got to his feet after the psychometry, and looked across the residence, he eyed Obi-Wan, who showed up, assuming that he had come here after the incident. They really hadn't spoken extensively over this situation, and Obi-Wan opened himself up again, asking his former pupil if he had a moment. Anakin nodded and walked over. Kenobi revealed that Padme's Republic Restructure Act was completely vetoed by the Chancellor. Anakin squinted his eyes. It wasn't explained in great detail, but when the words came out, Anakin's head again started to spin. The martyr wasn't ever going to be Padme, it was going to be the Jedi. They were the ones who took the blame for something so far out of their control. Skywalker turned towards his vessel and balled his fist. It all made sense. He connected the dots. The tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, Padme's legacy, Bail Organa showing up, the Sith sabers, the Republic Restructure Act. It wasn't just one action, it was a number of them. Anakin saw red. He didn't even remember saying anything to Obi-Wan. He just lunged into his own vessel and ripped across the city. Skywalker put the pieces together in his mind. Every assassination attempt, every moment was to kill Padme. Whether it was sending her to the Malevolence for no reason at all, or attempting to kill her on Scipio, or before the war even started, all these minor acts were leading up to the moment Palpatine could no longer rely on someone else to kill his biggest challenge. She was the constant thorn inside, and in Palpatine's veto, it was why Bail showed up and yelled whatever he said to Palpatine. That scene caused by Organa wasn't for nothing earlier in the day. Skywalker's head pulsated as he actually got dizzy. When he landed, he crashed the ship on the landing platform of the executive building. Before he got out, he considered everything he knew, and decided if this was the right decision or not, but he couldn't help it anymore. It was clear that the culprit was Palpatine, not because he had direct evidence, but because he had gathered enough from his dear friend that proved he was behind this. Had Anakin not been told about Plagueis the Wise, or had seen the Crimson Saber with the almost recognizable voice, he wouldn't have been here. If it wasn't for Obi-Wan telling him about the Republic Restructure Act, he wouldn't be here. But this was the answer. It had to be. Anakin ignored it, and now he couldn't avoid the truth. He didn't know it, but Obi-Wan was trying to catch up after alerting the Council. Terra Sanube, at the exact same time Anakin left, had reversed the image of the holo recording. The brown Jedi robes were not brown, they were maroon and blue. Sanube was closing in on an answer. Sidious had intended this investigation to be a diversion until Order 66. Basically, enough of a distraction until he no longer needed it. Palpatine was finishing up some of his work for the day, when the doors behind him opened. He got up to greet whoever it was, and Anakin's lightsaber buzzed to life. He swung in at Palpatine without hesitation. He ducked out of the way. Palpatine used his Sith skills to slip and avoid Anakin's first strikes, before Skywalker locked the doors and Palpatine demanded answers. Anakin, through a fiery glare, told Palpatine he knew the truth, and before he could finish, the Chancellor shook his head. He reminded Skywalker that the Jedi were power-hungry, and Anakin rebuted. That quote about fear of losing power applied most to the Chancellor, and Anakin raised his sabers. From the vases around Palpatine, 2 crimson weapons ignited and formed an X, which defended him. Skywalker looked down in surprise, but it only furthered his rage. Sidious never expected Anakin to figure the plot out. He figured everything would be an empire by the time Anakin connected the dots, if he ever did. The Jedi and Windu were meant to be the main culprits, but Palpatine couldn't account for the grief Anakin would feel over this loss, because he didn't truly feel emotion. It was worse, comparable to what he felt when his own mother died. Skywalker bashed his sabers down, and aggressively and powerfully batted Palpatine's defenses backwards. When Obi-Wan got to the door, he could hear sabers colliding and forced his own weapon into it. Sidious realized that this fight would become one of life and death if he didn't kill Skywalker first. He assumed the Jedi breaking in were multiple. It wasn't his first choice, but with Windu away from Coruscant, the temple could be besieged by himself, and the clone armies if needed. Palpatine weaved his sabers down, and Skywalker deflected, spinning away from another strike and using the Force to lob a chair at his opponent. Sidious mocked Anakin before flinging electricity at his victim. Skywalker raised the saber and defended it, but Palpatine flew in above him, and he rolled out of the way, avoiding a strike, and on his knees, slashed at the Sith Lord, who knocked him off his feet. Obi-Wan broke through the door as Anakin crawled backwards, and just as Obi-Wan prepared to engage, Sidious fired electricity at him, but he blocked it. Palpatine raged across the room, attacking Kenobi, who defended expertly, protecting himself as the rage-filled Anakin, not ready to lose anyone else, charged in. He physically bodied Palpatine with his shoulder and slashed downwards. Palpatine's smaller frame forced him to use his agility, but Anakin's rage made him a blinding opponent to fight against. Kenobi moved around, adding strikes of form 4 where he could to assist this onslaught. Anakin, blinded by his rage still, ripped his saber down, and as Palpatine countered with his available saber, Anakin reached up and grabbed the Sith Lord's hand which was coming down on top of him. He twisted it with his own bare hand, and swung in. Sidious defended. So, Anakin threw his saber up multiple times towards Palpatine's stomach. The Sith Lord held his saber down, blocking everything, but losing strength with every deflection. He tried to break free with his other hand and launched electricity out of it, but it only made Skywalker angrier. Obi-Wan stepped back and watched in almost fear as his apprentice was consumed by the dark side. The lightning rolled across Anakin's shoulders and he pounded his saber upwards, fighting to break Palpatine's defenses. The Sith Lord's saber busted backwards into his chest, and Skywalker shoved his weapon right into Palpatine's body. The electricity stopped flowing, and Anakin didn't stop. He put Palpatine on his saber like it was a pike, and jabbed his opponent into the ground. Sidious had a little bit of life left in him, and his last sight would be Anakin wailing on him with all of his strength, indenting the floor, making Palpatine's body even less recognizable than Padme's. Skywalker couldn't stop himself, and Obi-Wan honestly didn't have the courage to bring Anakin down from this. He needed to let it out, because Palpatine had taken Anakin's everything. It would last for a little longer than a minute, and by the end of what felt like a century of torment, Anakin would back away from his work of art. Palpatine's body was basically nothing, and Skywalker, so close to becoming Vader, stepped out of the shadow of the Dark Apprentice and returned to himself. He stumbled, but caught his footing and looked at the broken body of his former friend. Then he turned to Obi-Wan and just nodded his head, as if something had been said between them, but they both knew. Kenobi looked at the mess and just put his hand on Anakin's shoulder and pushed him along. It was time for him to go. The Jedi Council, consisting of Saci, Shakti, Agan, Coleman, and former member Oppa Rancisis, would arrive to assist Obi-Wan with the mess Anakin had left for them. Skywalker wouldn't even make it back to the temple. He'd fall apart and eventually asleep in the wreckage of his starship, the one he crashed on the landing pad. The mess would be really hard for the Jedi to manage, but thanks to Terra Sinube, they'd be able to connect some dots back to Palpatine. The Order was on the hot seat, and it would be for several months, even after the war ended. Despite capturing the Separatist Council and destroying Grievous and Dooku, and even winning the war, the Republic would hold a permanent grudge against the Jedi. It wouldn't be until information about the cloning situation with Dooku/Tyrannus, the executive orders, several contingencies, the assassinations and the failed attempts, not to mention the entire war itself, would the Jedi lose said hot seat. When it became public information that Sidious was the monster behind the war, the Jedi were cheered on as heroes. It was almost a 180. A Senate bill, the HoloNet, and news footage would change public perception and opinion almost instantaneously. That would be part of Padme's legacy, actually. There were, of course, firm Jedi haters out there, but obviously, they were the true heroes that ended the Clone War. Anakin, during this several-month period of time, would be taken away from the Jedi Temple by Luminara and Master Yoda, with C-3PO, which he would finish constructing during this time. They would start a regiment to help Anakin heal from his loss. In this, he would avoid public scrutiny aimed at the Jedi, and the hearings that involved Padme's legacy piece of legislation and her assassination. It would be something he could learn about when he returned, but for now, it would be their way of taking care of him. This joint Jedi expedition would be utilized to reconnect each of them back to the Force and bind them respectively. During their expedition, others would come and join and leave them. Notable members were the duo of Quinlan Vos and Aayla Secura, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and even Ki-Adi-Mundi. Anakin's usage of the dark side against the Sith Lord wasn't accounted for by Obi-Wan. He told no one. And while the Jedi were wise enough to assume the truth, they just didn't really speak about it. Obi-Wan told the Council what he suspected about Padme and Anakin, and he made each of them the vow to never speak to Skywalker about it. Obi-Wan only broke the truth to them because the Senator was sadly gone, and Anakin needed their collective attention. Skywalker was a broken man, and the Jedi with him on this journey of healing would be integral to helping him return to a semi-normal existence. He would harmonize with the Force and with the Jedi all the same. His need for community, the Force, and familial need were met exceptionally with the aid of these Jedi. Of course, rebuilding C-3PO with R2-D2 by his side was a perfect help. Anakin would tell Luminara and Yoda the truth about his relationship, and he felt honored that they respected his honesty. They would not punish him, they would not talk bad about his choices. They were simply understanding and willing to listen, which was more than anything. He'd be away from the temple and from Coruscant for almost a year. He'd be present for Padme's funeral, and then he'd return to his meditative journey. The day he returned, fully, he'd be welcomed back as Master Skywalker. Without a family outside of the Order, aside from the Naberries, which he still adored, he stayed loyal to his found family within the Order. Yoda became his #1 ally, and the two of them would further develop their relationship until Yoda's natural passing, decades later. There, of course, were some temptations for Anakin to start a new family once the Sith were dead, but he knew in all of it that he could never love anyone or someone else the same as he did Padme. Some days this did bother him. Most days he was okay with knowing that. Finding peace in that truth and in that reality made him a better Jedi. After all, he was a hero of the Clone War. The Sith were destroyed, or captured in Maul's case, and the Republic was saved from itself. As a lifetime seat holder on the High Council, he would slowly become what Qui-Gon and Dooku could have never been. The balance between traditional Jedi habits and idealistic maverick-like traits made him the outspoken voice of the Council. Like Qui-Gon, he challenged the Council to sway away from the Republic and maintain focus on the humanitarians. In a way, by doing this, he would fulfill the lifelong dreams of both Padme and Qui-Gon. That'd be something worth living for, something that he would carry with him as, over the years, the Jedi Chosen One rose to Master of the Order, Grand Master, and eventually an image of inspiration for future generations to aspire, be like. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. This is a story deeply rooted in tragedy, and the beginning is just really horrific. It's just sad, honestly. But I thought it'd be really interesting tackling this perspective with Palpatine. I think Palpatine could really see an easy way to turn Anakin against the Jedi here, and really the biggest reason it doesn't work, or the biggest reason it doesn't come to fruition, is because Mace Windu is sent to Utapau. If Obi-Wan or if Kit Fisto, for example, are sent to Utapau, specifically Kit Fisto for this example, I think Anakin would still fall to the dark side. I think Mace Windu being used as the villain in this scenario by Palpatine would be the really big turning point for Skywalker. Without Windu being present on Coruscant, not that Windu is bad in any way, it's just that without having someone to turn into the actual perpetrator, Anakin doesn't have anyone to project his blame onto. Like I said in the video itself, there are like 3 specific points that really turn Anakin. It's his use of psychometry, it's Obi-Wan talking about Palpatine's veto, and it's of course the Plagueis the Wise story. Without those 3 things, without any one of those 3 things, I don't think Anakin fully comes back to the light. I think he stays in the dark side. I think he turns on somebody, maybe even Obi-Wan, and kills him outright, just out of rage and vengeance. But he doesn't. He comes back to the light, and I really don't think, I think Anakin just wouldn't be able to find happiness with another partner after Padme's death. So that was my rationale for him becoming like the perfect Jedi in a sense. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.